How did Japanese feminism destroy itself? It was once so grand and powerful, and in the end it collapsed just as completely. Tragic, tragic, tragic. In the 1980s, Japan once launched a massive feminist movement, and the status of women improved dramatically. However, after entering the new millennium, Japanese feminism rapidly declined. Even women who had once supported feminism gradually joined the anti-feminist camp. So how did Japanese feminism fall into decline? Why did calls for women's rights end up being counterattacked by feminism itself? Today, let us take a closer look at the rise and fall of Japanese feminism. Japan belongs to the East Asian cultural sphere. Before the end of World War II, Japanese women had a very low social status. After marriage, they were not allowed to work, were not allowed to disobey their husbands, and could only be dutiful and practical housewives, devoted to supporting their husbands and raising children at home. It was not until after the 1960s, when Japan's economy took off, that women gained more opportunities for education. More and more women were no longer willing to remain housewives. They began entering the workforce and earning their own income. This meant that women gained economic independence and were no longer merely appendages of men. By the 1980s, Japan had entered its economic golden age. In an era when wealth seemed everywhere, Japanese women rapidly accumulated assets, and their purchasing power soared. Not only economically, but also politically, more and more women began to emerge on the political stage. The number of female legislators increased steadily, and they possessed a stable and sizable voter base. As a result, legislation related to women's rights followed one after another, including equal pay for equal work, prohibitions against discrimination in hiring by enterprises and government institutions, and expanded rights for women within marriage law. Most importantly, the crimes of rape and indecent assault in Japanese law were finally reactivated after long neglect. At this point, the feminist movement appeared to be developing very well. Japanese women obtained the rights they deserved and dared to say no to oppression and injustice. However, just as the feminist movement in Japan was reaching its peak, things began to take a strange turn. First, capital reaped enormous profits from the wave of female consumption in Japan. In order to further stimulate women's spending, product marketing and advertising began to tie themselves to feminism. One of the most typical examples was the expanded definition of diamond rings and jewelry. Under the packaging of Japanese distributors, diamond rings no longer merely symbolized marriage, but also represented urban women, non-marriage lifestyles, and many other concepts. At the same time, expensive evening gowns were repackaged from seasonal banquet attire into essential items for women. As a result, many women dressed formally not only for social events but even in daily life. Capital encouraged women to consume, and even more so encouraged them to equate material possessions with happiness. In restaurants in Ginza, couple-set meals were successively introduced. Dishes that originally cost only a few thousand yen were packaged and priced at 30,000 to 50,000 yen. Men were also encouraged to choose high-end restaurants for dates, and it was even defined that a man who did not take a woman to dine in such places was not worth entrusting with a lifetime commitment. Second, as women's political influence continued to grow, some overcorrective policies were passed. For example, maternity leave and marriage leave for women were extended, women were prohibited from working overtime, and companies were required to provide female employees with more material benefits during Western holidays such as Valentine's Day and Christmas. At that time, Japanese companies were doing business all over the world and were not short of money, so they readily accepted these demands. However, under the stimulation of both economic and policy factors, some Japanese women began stirring up trouble, using feminism as a pretext to promote distorted values. For example, the definition of what constituted harassment against women became increasingly broad. In 1991, a female employee accused her male supervisor of sending her more than 5 emails every day. Although the content was entirely work-related, it was still classified as workplace sexual harassment. In the end, the supervisor was forced to resign and was replaced by a female leader. Similarly, on a train in Osaka, during the morning rush hour, a man accidentally touched a woman's shoulder with his hand and was accused of sexual harassment by the woman. She insisted on pressing charges and refused mediation. Although the charge of sexual harassment was ultimately dismissed due to insufficient evidence, the prolonged legal proceedings cost the man his job. He received threatening letters at his doorstep every day and was eventually forced to leave Osaka. Ironically, at that time, mainstream opinion in Japan leaned toward women, and people were more willing to believe that the man had intentionally harassed the woman. There were many similar cases. Of course, incidents of women being genuinely harassed on trains did exist. Under pressure from public opinion and collective lobbying by female legislators, local governments across Japan successively introduced women-only train cars, women-only parking spaces, and women-only dining areas to ensure that women would not be harassed. This further intensified gender antagonism at the societal level. Many Japanese men, in order to keep their jobs, began deliberately avoiding women, for fear of being accused of unfounded charges. In 1992, an article titled "The Four Boyfriends of Heisei Women" was published in a women's magazine. Written in the first person, it described the daily lives of women in Tokyo and introduced a new term, romantic capitalism. The so-called four boyfriends referred to four types of men: the errand man, the payer, the gift man, and the main boyfriend. Each played a specific role to meet women's different needs. The errand man referred to men with average income and looks, responsible for running errands and handling miscellaneous tasks. The payer referred to wealthy men who covered expenses when dining at upscale venues. The gift man was responsible for giving surprise gifts on special occasions, as many Japanese women valued ritual and ceremony. The main boyfriend, meanwhile, was responsible for romance and emotional connection. He could be poor, but had to be handsome, serving as the woman's emotional anchor. Yes, the article made it very clear that wealth, good looks, charm, and intellect were unlikely to exist in a single man at the same time. Therefore, it encouraged Japanese women to have four boyfriends simultaneously, allowing them to maximize their happiness. Many young Japanese women who had just entered society eagerly embraced these values and followed the example, dating multiple men at the same time and becoming so-called players. At this point, Japanese feminism gradually shifted from reasonable demands to extremism and pathology. During Japan's golden era, such demands might still have seemed acceptable. But once Japan's economy collapsed, the bubble of female privilege burst as well. How did Japanese feminism destroy itself? The more glorious it once was, the more complete its final collapse became. Next, let us look at how Japanese feminism backfired on itself. In 1992, Japan's economic bubble began to burst, ushering in the so-called lost era. The winter of capital was accompanied by corporate bankruptcies and closures. Even companies that did not collapse resorted to massive layoffs to survive. During Japan's widespread unemployment wave, the group hit hardest was women in the workforce. With limited positions available, Japanese companies followed the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. Whoever could produce more results for the same salary would remain employed. As a result, women accounted for the majority of those laid off. Many women who had been independently striving in cities completely lost their source of income. However, even after becoming unemployed, most women's consumption desires did not diminish. Many unemployed Japanese women began relying economically on their partners or boyfriends, insisting on maintaining high consumption and materialistic values even after losing their jobs. But in an era of economic decline, most Japanese men were no longer willing to support this. The first to withdraw were ordinary Japanese men. They had once been the targets of disdain by feminists, but now they recognized their own position. Coupled with the economic pressure of unemployment, they no longer actively sought contact with women. Their lives revolved around commuting between home and work, while their emotional needs were satisfied through anime, games, and watching movies. Men with stronger financial resources were also unwilling to take responsibility for marriage. They had an awakening: if I have money, why not spend it on pleasing myself? As a result, capable men also joined the ranks of non-marriage advocates. They were willing to date women, but not to marry. Unwilling to give up their former high-consumption lifestyles, Japanese women attempted to protect their rights through political means. However, this time the Japanese government could do little to help. Corporate layoffs complied with regulations, and the government itself was struggling with economic problems, leaving no room for performative gender equality policies. More seriously, extreme feminism began to backfire. Amid the anti-feminist sentiment following the economic collapse, many non-feminist women spoke up for themselves. They asked why the achievements they earned through hard work should be sacrificed for the actions of extremists. Unfortunately, when individual behavior escalates into a social issue, Japanese men had already labeled Japanese women as demanding, untouchable, and risky to approach. They were unwilling to invest additional time and money to distinguish between reasonable and extreme women. Similarly, Japanese companies became reluctant to hire women, and Japanese men avoided interacting with women or taking responsibility for marriage. Even more ironically, elite women who had once advocated feminism also began to oppose it. They had barely survived the economic crisis, and feared that if feminism were promoted again and the tide turned out of control, their own social status would be jeopardized. So who were the victims of Japanese feminism? First were ordinary women who did not participate in extreme feminism. They may have been economically and intellectually independent, but were forced to pay the price for the overcorrection and privilege-driven backlash of the movement. Second were those who advocated female privilege. By making excessive and unreasonable demands, they paid the price they deserved. Finally, Japanese men suffered as well. They lost the desire to pursue partners and became unwilling to take responsibility for marriage and love, contributing to Japan's low birth rate and aging population crisis today. Women's independence still has a long road ahead, but its core has never changed. Women striving through their own efforts, achieving independence, and pursuing happiness without demanding concessions from men will never be subject to public condemnation. Finally, we encourage women of the new era to live authentically and become truly independent women.